Hi, I'm Richard, Trails of the City, Footprints of London and Other Places, History Tour Guide, and welcome to the 5th instalment of Trails Live History Casts, my weekly Tuesday evening broadcasts on Facebook during this very difficult coronavirus pandemic lockdown period. And each week I'm doing a little feature on different London historic characters which I've talked about on various walks that I've done over the years. And this week's is Teresa Cornelys, glamorous Italian opera star, London music impresario, and the hostess of the most fabulously flamboyant masked balls and concerts in 18th century London. And I looked into Teresa when working on my walk, Soho, London's Great Melting Pot. This was put together as a bit of a response to the 2016 Brexit referendum, to celebrate 350 years of immigration into Soho, looking at waves of foreign migrant communities as well as historic London migrants. And Teresa's story is such a breathless roller coaster of a ride that it was too irresistible of me not to include as one of these talks. Teresa Immer was born in Venice in 1723. Her father was a theatre manager and actor, and from a young age she took to the stage, appearing in Italian opera and also touring grand opera houses in Germany, Holland, Denmark. She exploited her great beauty by becoming the mistress of a series of eminent European men. She married an Italian dancer in the 1740s with whom she had one son, and she took the name Cornelys from a rich Dutch merchant with whom she was romantically associated in the 1750s. But perhaps most famously, she was the lover of the infamous traveller Lothario Giuseppe Casanova, the lover of him on and off for a number of years, with whom she had a daughter. But coming into the late 1750s, at 36, clearly she's looking for a bit of a change of direction, and on the suggestion of a musician friend, comes to London with the idea that it's showing a good promise for somewhere to put on musical entertainments. And in September 1759 starts a series of concerts at the Little Theatre, Haymarket, now the Theatre Royal Haymarket. I should imagine that Teresa picked up a thing or two from her theatre manager father, and she must have learnt a lot also from working in the world of Italian opera. She was certainly pretty entrepreneurial and had no shortage of ambition, one might say, because in April 1760 she takes a lease on Carlisle House, a grand restoration aristocratic mansion to the east of Soho Square, built at the end of the 1600s. And she sees in it great potential for putting on musical evenings. And she begins with soirees of card playing, chamber music and dances, which go so well she decides to get the builders in and expand to extend her offer, building a big ballroom, a summer room that holds a timber crescent-shaped table which apparently can seat around 400 guests, and a concert hall. And it's fair to say that Mrs. Cornelys' concerts and balls become the talk of the town. She's described by the London historian Peter Ackroyd as enterprising, irrepressible, charming and scathing in equal measure. So popular are her balls, in fact, that in 1770 on one occasion Parliament actually votes to adjourn early so that the MPs shouldn't be detained in getting to one of her balls. And they acquire a bit of a risque and exotic reputation. Some people, incidentally, also have described them as Soho's first nightclubs. But balls had been around in London from the early 18th century, a bit of an opportunity for aristocratic and the moneyed classes to dress up and subvert social norms, or rather the stonkingly rich putting on false costume and behaving extremely badly. For example, a report from 1770 talks about a pageant of over 800 extravagantly dressed guests disgorging themselves from their posh carriages. One dressed as Adam in a flesh-coloured silk. Another appeared in the character of an Indian sultana in a robe of cloth of gold. Another account tells of the infamous Duchess of Kingston coming along dressed as Iphigenia. She was a Greek princess from mythology, the daughter of Agamemnon, whom he's required to kill to save Troy from being invaded. And Horace Walpole describes her coming dressed, or should I say undressed, ready for slaughter. And it's fair to say then that there are reports emanating from Mrs. Cornelys' balls of scantily clad ladies in violation of laws of all sober principles, and it was a well-known prosperous venue for courtesans and the instigation of illicit liaisons. But not all was such frippery and sexiness at Mrs. Cornelys' events. This was just when London was showing the first shoots of becoming a European renowned centre of live music. And she starts to put on some 2 weekly seasons of concerts, engaging with the best foreign musicians in town at the time. For example, 2 Germans, a Karl Friedrich Abel, who's also engaged as the Queen's music tutor, and his colleague Johann Christian Bach, the youngest of the Bach brood, who comes and settles in London in his 20s and becomes known as the London Bach. I mentioned Casanova earlier, and at the height of Mrs. Cornelys' fame and riches, in 1763, he comes to London, perhaps seeking to reacquaint an old flame, and he makes her wait in an antechamber, finally after hours being seen by a servant who escorts him to lodgings close by, explaining that Mrs. Cornelys will be able to see her the following day. On seeing how squalid the offered accommodation is, and generally resentful of this what he considers appalling treatment, that he stomps off to seek alternative rooms with a friend. Now, despite all of Mrs. Cornelys' success, it rather went to her head, and all that she spent on the lavish extensions and developments could not be covered by the profits she was making. This added to the fact that at the beginning of the 1770s, competition was hotting up with the opening of the Pantheon on Oxford Street, Rotunda, also the Hanover Rooms were both putting on successful musical evenings. And in 1772, her creditors caught up with her and she was convicted of debt and consigned to Fleet Prison, with Carlisle House seized from her and sold at auction. But Mrs. Cornelys turns out to be indefatigable, and on payment of her debts and release from prison, she spends the rest of that decade in the 1770s frantically trying to put on events where she can, at pleasure gardens, at small chamber music venues, and in a long-standing dispute trying to get legal access to put on events at Carlisle House. But she is sadly just consigned again for debt in 1780. In fact, she's one of the prisoners during the infamous anti-Catholic Gordon riots in 1780, which are freed by the rioters from the Fleet prison. But considering Mrs. Cornelys' fame and renown, it's very sad to consider her appallingly steep fall, ending in her last few years in the 1790s, selling ass's milk just to raise a few pennies. And she died in the hospital of the Fleet prison with hardly a penny to her name. But what about Carlisle House? Well, that was demolished in the early 1790s, and an Irish Catholic church was built on the site. In fact, it was one of the first Catholic churches to be built in the country, allowed after recent Catholic liberation laws. And the current building was built 100 years ago, a late Gothic Victorian Grade 2 listed building, recently subject to a restoration, which is very well worth seeing, but sadly which contains no remembrance or plaque or evidence on it of the throng of extravagantly dressed people crowding to attend the most famous and flamboyant musical events held in London in the 18th century, or the amazing woman that was behind them. So anyway, everyone, thanks very much again for listening. Stay positive and well if you can. Next week is going to be a little bit of a change of tack. I think I've been ranging a bit from the 18th to the 19th centuries, so we're getting well and truly into the 20th century and a great man of peace. So everyone, please stay safe, stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives. Bye bye, bye bye.